Welcome to CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. Coming up, the price of your Thanksgiving meal will certainly go up compared to last year. We'll bring you the latest on the supply chain issue. Plus, inflation may rise to 7% by the end of this year, and the recently signed infrastructure bill may cause higher deficits and even higher inflation next year.
The truth is, it's not fully paid for, and as a result, it will turn out to be inflationary.
Plus, protecting the American vote against some efforts to loosen the standards could mean,
I think it's a way of, unfortunately, making it easier for folks to cheat in elections.
And how a simple act of kindness at the gas pump made an eternal difference. Those stories and more ahead on Newswatch.
This is CBN Newswatch.
From Thanksgiving turkey and Christmas gifts to holiday travel, rising costs are already hitting Americans hard in their wallets. Bottlenecks at shipping ports continue to be a main source of the problem. Backlogs at the LA Long Beach port complex are unraveling slowly. They've seen a 32% decrease in the amount of cargo blocking the supply chain, but it's not enough to ease inflation and national shortages. The price of Thanksgiving dinner is rising twice as fast as consumer wages. The cost of turkey alone jumped 21% this year. A family of 10 can expect to pay 8% more than last year. That's about $85 to gather around the table. Some families could forego traditional Thanksgiving meals altogether due to nationwide shortages. California's extensive bottlenecks are being blamed on poor infrastructure. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says there are efforts to ease bottlenecks, but problems could get worse before they get better.
I heard somebody say this is not a silver bullet situation. It's more silver buckshot, a lot of different things that can be deployed at the same time.
This is jaw-dropping and without precedent. You've never seen 6 containers stacked high. You've never seen sites like you're seeing here.
Experts warn another reason for inflation and backlogs is the overbuying of goods. Holiday shopping is heating up with retail sales increasing almost 2% in October. Almost 20% of shoppers report overbuying to account for supply chain issues. Electronics, appliances, and sporting goods are the hottest commodities. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration says it will not enforce Biden's vaccine mandate. The announcement made on the agency's website after a federal court temporarily blocked the mandate. The number of lawsuits against the measure continues to increase, and now the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals will hear arguments against Biden's vaccine rule. Cornerstone Church in San Antonio is apologizing for an event held in its sanctuary last weekend. Today, lead pastor Matt Hagee asked for forgiveness for his oversight, saying the Re-Awaken America tour, quote, was not properly vetted. It was not appropriate to allow this event at our church. This week, there's been a flurry of blowback from Christian leaders in the aftermath of what happened. Senior National Affairs correspondent Heather Sells has our report.
A movement called the Re-Awaken America Tour has hosted sellout crowds in churches and other venues this year, offering a mix of worship, medical advice, and politics. It attracted national attention, however, for a recent event at San Antonio's Cornerstone Church.
Video of the crowd breaking out in this chant, a euphemism for a vulgar threat against President Biden, went viral over the weekend, leading some faith leaders like Pastor Sam Rodriguez and Southern Baptist President Ed Litton to condemn it. Litton told CBN News Christians should reject the callous methods and crude sloganeering of secular politics. Another viral moment, former Trump National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn calling on stage for a national religion.
So if we are going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion, one nation under God and one religion under God.
Rodriguez, who commended Flynn for his years of government service, told CBN News Michael Flynn is constitutionally and morally wrong to advocate for one religion emerging out of America. Religious liberty serves as the central firewall against totalitarianism. Flynn later defended his comment in a statement saying he's worried about religious persecution. Wheaton College's Andrew McDonald says he understands that many Christians are concerned about the secularization of our culture, but that they shouldn't want the government telling them what to believe.
I don't think they should have that power, and I think one of the greatest geniuses of America is that we don't have to do that. We can live together and be on mission for the gospel at the same time.
Conservative author Rod Dreier says one religion would gut the First Amendment and be a disaster for Christians.
If we have to have only one religion in this country, who's to say that religion might not be some form of wokeness, which is a lot more popular with the younger generation than traditional biblical Christianity.
Re-Awaken's Clay Clark told CBN News he couldn't speak to Flynn's comment, but defended his use of the Let's Go Brandon chant at Cornerstone, saying many pastors use their pulpits for political purposes. In recent years, Christians have struggled more with the mixing of faith and politics, what some call Christian nationalism. It's a difficult line to navigate, keeping patriotism and politics separate from love of God and places of worship. Heather Sells, CBN News.
A whistleblower at the Federal Bureau of Investigation released an internal email to the House Judiciary Committee showing the FBI is using terrorist tracking tools on parents who have spoken out at local school board meetings. It's further evidence of what most parents are calling extreme government overreach, stemming from an order from Attorney General Merrick Garland, a controversial order basically deploying the FBI in response to the National School Boards Association demanding action against parents. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan wrote Garland about the damaging email, saying this disclosure provides specific evidence that federal law enforcement operationalized counterterrorism tools at the behest of a left-wing special interest group against concerned parents. Here are some other stories we're following for you now in the CBN Newsroom. Dr. Paul Merrick, professor of medicine and chief of pulmonary and critical care at Eastern Virginia Medical School, is suing Sentara Healthcare for banning the use of certain drugs to treat patients who have COVID. He says it endangers the lives of its COVID patients. Among those drugs banned is ivermectin, which is being promoted as a treatment for COVID, although not FDA approved. And you can read more on this story by going to cbnnews.com. Workers for John Deere have returned to work after a 5-week strike. United Auto Workers Union accepted the latest offer from the company. The new contract will last 6 years and features benefits such as lump sum bonuses in years 2 and 4 and an immediate 10% raise with a 5% raise in years 3 and 5. Coming up, the realities of inflation and the causes behind it. There are many, and what needs to happen to turn it all around. Welcome back to Newswatch. You'll be spending 21% more on your Thanksgiving meal this year than you did in 2020. According to The Balance, the cost of potatoes and turkey are up more than 8%. Cranberries have also skyrocketed, up 28.5%. And the cost for a ham this year is up a whopping 62.5%. Why this huge jump in prices, making this one of the most expensive Thanksgivings ever? Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Stockton University professor of finance Dr. Michael Busler says supply chain shortages are only partially to blame.
It's not just caused by supply chain disruptions. There are other reasons why we're getting inflation, not just in the food we buy, but in virtually everything. So how bad is the problem? Based on last month's CPI number, from October 2020 to October 2021, 1 year, prices are up 6.2%. That's the highest inflation, 12-month inflation we've had in more than 30 years. The Biden administration and the Federal Reserve both say this is due to supply chain disruptions, and as soon as the supply chain disruptions are resolved, prices will return to normal. I don't agree with that because there are 4 other reasons why seeing inflation, not just in food, but in virtually everything that we buy. And even after the supply chain problems are resolved, unfortunately, those four problems are still going to be here. So what are they? Number one, the Biden administration would like the country to use less fossil fuels. By restricting the supply at a time when demand is growing, energy prices keep going up. And not only will we pay more for gasoline and oil, but heating oil and natural gas, but also manufacturers will pay more for energy to produce their products. That'll drive prices up too. Even retailers will pay more because most of their goods are brought in by truck, and trucks will be paying higher fuel costs. So number one is energy prices rising. Number two, for whatever reason, a large number of people who were laid off during the pandemic are not returning to work. There's over 3 million people who have simply dropped out of the labor force and are not going back to work. In order to induce those people to come back to work, businesses had to raise wages, mostly on lower income workers. Well, once the lower income workers get an increase in wages, then people who have been there a while say, hey, the new person is making almost as much as I am, so I want to raise. And you end up getting this wage inflation. Once that happens, then labor costs go up for business, so they have to raise their prices 8 or 9%. And then the next year, labor wants even a larger increase, and you get into this wage price spiral, which is also driving up prices. Third reason, the federal government has deficit spent, that is, they spent more money than they took in the last 2 years, almost $6 trillion. On a $22 trillion annual economy, that will lead to pure inflation and an expansionary policy by the Federal Reserve. Those are driving inflation up. Even when the supply chain is resolved, we're still going to have those things present, and I'm very nervous about what future inflation will look like.
Okay, Dr. Busler, the president expects the infrastructure bill that he signed into law Monday will ease inflation. Will new spending ease these alarming price increases? What do you think?
No. If you deficit spend more, you create more demand in the economy, and that will lead to more, not less, inflation. Now, he says this won't add to the deficit and won't add to deficit spending because it'll be fully paid for. But the truth is, it's not fully paid for. They're not going to be able to raise taxes by the amount they want to increase in spending, so it's not fully paid for. And as a result, it will turn out to be inflationary.
Finally, how will the year end for the economy? A better than average Christmas season? What do you expect for 2022?
I expect this Christmas season, assuming there's enough supply, the retail sales to be very strong throughout the rest of the year. Going into next year, I'm very nervous because I'm afraid inflation will remain high both in November and December. I think we'll end the year with about a 7% inflation rate, even higher than we have now. Going into next year, eventually the Federal Reserve is going to have to do something to address the inflation problem. And that something is to reduce that bond buying program and raise interest rates. But the longer they wait to do it, the more drastic the action will become. My biggest fear for next year and going forward is we run into a problem where we have inflation, we have large government budget deficits, we have a huge public debt, which we're going to have to address the first week in December of this year. If business can't get labor, because we have somewhat of a labor shortage, and they can't get capital, because there may be a capital shortage, they can't expand. So what you end up with is an inflationary economy that business can't expand and remain stagnant. That leads to a stagflation problem that we haven't seen since the late 1970s. That's my biggest fear going forward.
America is deeply divided over what's needed to protect voter and election integrity. Hans von Spakovsky, who previously served on the Federal Election Commission, says there needs to be some major corrections. First of all, what is the greatest threat to our elections today?
The ease with which fraud can be committed undetected and then not investigated and not prosecuted by election officials and law enforcement officials.
What would you say are some of the biggest fraud cases out there that you've documented?
I wrote a case study years ago about a very large election fraud case that was prosecuted by the Justice Department in Chicago. Almost every kind of fraud occurred in that election. Over 60 individuals were prosecuted and convicted of election fraud. Two other just quick examples. 1997, the Miami mayor's race was overturned by a judge. The judge estimated there had been at least 5,000 fraudulent ballots cast in that election. And don't forget, just 3 years ago, 2018, the 9th congressional district race in North Carolina was overturned and a new election held because of absentee ballot fraud in that election.
You've written a book, Hans, with John Fund called Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote. You outline changes that need to take place. What are they?
Well, we have a whole list of recommendations at the end of the book after we've documented the problems. And it's everything, it's just common sense things, such as requiring an ID when you vote, both in person and through the absentee balloting process. Actually verifying the residential address that someone claims as to where they're living when they're registering to vote. Verifying citizenship to make sure that somebody really is a U.S. citizen when they're registering to vote. And taking very basic steps to maintain the accuracy of voter registration rolls to make sure that when people die or when they move out of state, they're taken off the rolls so that their names can't be used to cast illegal ballots.
Did the contentious presidential election in 2020 prompt this book?
Well, no, John Fund and I have been writing about this for a long time. In fact, our first book came out almost a decade ago. But last year's election really accelerated the unfortunate push by folks on the progressive left to change the rules and basically get rid of the kind of safety and security protocols that states have in place. And they use COVID-19 as excuse. I mean, an example of that is that they've been pushing a bill, trying to get a bill passed through Congress, H.R. 1, that would ban or void all state voter ID laws. I mean, there is no reason to do that other than to make it easy to cheat in elections.
Why are some of these new rules so dangerous?
Well, take what I just talked about, the trying to wipe out voter ID laws. At the very same time, the left has been pushing same-day voter registration. That means that states would have to allow you to walk into a polling place on Election Day, register, and immediately vote. When you combine this with the fact that they can't ask you for an ID, it would make it very easy for someone to go from one polling place to another, register under false name, vote, and then go to another polling place and do it again. And even if election officials are suspicious, they can't ask you for an ID.
And looking further into the voter ID issue, why are some of the most basic election laws, like voter ID, being challenged in our politically divided culture? You talked a little bit about this, but delve into it more with us.
Sure. You know, there's an interesting dichotomy here. The American public overwhelmingly, for example, thinks that requiring an ID to verify your identity when you vote is common sense, and they support it. And by the way, the polling shows that's regardless of which political party they support or what their ethnic or racial background is. Unfortunately, the progressive left, very liberal advocacy organizations, and Democratic leaders like Joe Biden and others are constantly railing that voter ID is voter suppression. That's not true, but I think they do that. I mean, the only reasons can be that, one, they're trying to scare voters into thinking that someone's trying to keep them from voting because they think that'll get their voters out. But second, I think it's a way of, unfortunately, making it easier for folks to cheat in elections, which is not a good thing.
And quickly, we're almost out of time, but what do you think we should do before the next election?
I think more states in the upcoming legislative sessions in the states should pass election reforms the way Texas, Georgia, and Florida did at the beginning of this year. Other states need to follow their lead and put in the kind of remedies that those states did.
Okay, Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation and author of Our Broken Elections, How the Left Changed the Way You Vote. Thanks for your time, sir.
Sure thing, anytime.
Coming up, meeting God at the gas pump, how one church's idea to meet a practical need actually led people to Christ. Members of one Washington, D.C. church helped drivers put gas in their vehicles Saturday, and they witnessed 8 people give their lives to Christ. Greater Mount Calvary Holy Church provided $20 worth of gas to nearly 250 cars, a project the church called Gas on God.
It's our giving season, and what better way to kick it off than to give gas on God?
That's awesome. For 3 hours Saturday, volunteers filled up tanks and hearts while also providing prayer and live music. The good gesture did have one negative side effect. It backed up traffic for 6 blocks. It's a program for the church to provide relief and assistance to those in need. Of course, the positives are that it fueled lifelong faith for those who accepted Christ, showed God's love to all, and was definitely spreading goodwill this holiday season. And that's going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch, a great way to end the show. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.